liminal, state or time in which transition or change occurs apart from choice and assurance of what exists on the other side. Another definition might be space in which chaos and uncertainty are balanced with the hope and excitement of new beginnings. We know this kind of time because it exists in our scripture stories, and it is where I think we are in this region. Let me take a very brief amount of time to explain how we got where we are. One way to unwrap our history in a brief way is to use the standard bell curve. On the bottom left is where we began, and then as we move up and ministry increases, we would add new structures to enhance those ministries. But at some point in time towards the top, what happens is our structure begins to drive our ministry, and things begin to head down the curve. And let me explain further how I think that actually happened here in the upper Midwest. At the beginning of this country, pioneers began to move out west. And as they did, they started communities, and in those communities they started churches. And as those congregations began to grow, they linked up with their friends and other churches nearby, and they started doing ministries together. And as they did that, they also had need for fellowship and mutual ministries, and they began to gather together. And then at that point, they determined together that as the ministries increased, there was a need for someone, something to help them gather together and maintain the ministry that they had started doing together. As the congregations gathered together to decide what they were looking for, they came up with really two roles. Regional evangelists, someone who would go around and gather the congregations together, link the ministers, care for the ministers, and look for ways to do and places to do new ministry. That was the regional evangelist. The other role was the state secretary, and that was more of an administrative role and accountability role. In the upper Midwest, we called one person to do both kind of positions. It is worth noting that the flow shifted at this point when we moved to a separate manifestation understanding of region, needing to clarify that region and general and ecumenical as well as congregational were their own separate manifestations, their own valid kind of ministries. But it's also key to note that it did shift the flow, that we created our own separate board and we had a staff. We hired program staff with expertise to provide programming back out to the congregations. A direct shift in flow. This also then was followed up with name change, which illustrates the shift as well, going from a plural understanding of Christian churches in the upper Midwest to the Christian church in the upper Midwest to singular. It's important to note this in the history at this time. One of the key questions for leadership in the church is to know where you are on the bell curve. When have you crested? Have you crested? And if you have crested, how do you get back from the right-hand side of the curve to the left-hand side, back to the passion and energy and purpose of the church? One way to tell whether or not you are in need of a new structure, whether or not you've reached the top of the bell curve, or when your structure is driving your ministry rather than your ministry driving your structure, is fairly straightforward. When people no longer participate in that structure is ending. But at the same time that is happening, normally networks and societies and a new structure is developing out of that. People are coming together to do ministry, but they're coming together in groups outside the structure and beginning to form the next structure. This is the kind of shift we've been seeing in this region for nearly a decade, starting in particular with the Vision Task Group, which was charged with coming up with a mission statement, but rather came up with an articulation of the way that we do ministry and articulated a change in flow and structure in this region. We call that disciples together, when one congregation gets together with another congregation to do ministry. This was further articulated by the guidance group a few years later, in which they said that region is that which we do together, or moving away from a hub to a web understanding of ministry. We see this shift in particular in congregations and in regional ministry. As participation in the standard committee structure declines, ministries don't go away. Individuals still see need, still feel a call from God, gather with each other, and start new ministries that parallel the structure but are not in the structure. In short, this is exactly where the Vision Task Group believes the region sits, in between one structure and another, and that we have arrived here because of a liminal experience, not one of our own choosing. The truth is that we were forced into this time of transition and were asked to rise to the occasion. We found ourselves looking at debt we knew we had to repay, but we could not. The economy turned down just at that point, and we had retirement and staff changes. And any time you have these issues alone, let alone all three of them, It is definitely liminal time and calls to us to rise to the occasion and develop some kind of plan. And that's what we have done during this transition. It would also be wrong to characterize this time as all bad. Although we've been in liminal and we felt like we were in the wilderness and there was chaos and we really didn't know whether or not we would get to the other side or whether or not there even was another side. During the midst of that, during liminal time, there's been this balance of feeling like you're excited and filled with hope, and there's even a call to create something new again. And there's also a part where we experience God in a sense of discernment, of asking, what is it God is calling us to do? If we could do ministry again for the first time, how would we structure ourselves to do that ministry? So here is the proposed structure. It all begins with the fact that we have 150 congregations scattered throughout the upper Midwest. Each congregation is invited to send 2 representatives to the discernment gathering. Invited, not assumed, but invited as if we were doing it for the first time. At the same time, all clergy are also invited to attend this discernment gathering. Yes, this means that the gathered body could potentially be larger than 300, and I emphasize larger. What a great problem to have. But it does change the direction of flow and starts with the congregations sending representatives and then discerning together at one table as disciples together about what God is wanting us to do in ministry. In this structure, there are things called functions that we need to, as an institution, keep going. Those that we understand to be functions are property and investment unit, the personnel unit, the commission on ministry, and an operations council, which will serve as the main administrative committee for the region. The gathered body would serve as the main nominating pool for these functions. One of the most exciting parts of the new structure is how we choose our ministries. At present, we choose our ministries or predetermine our ministries through our bylaws and can occasionally add a task group to handle a particular cause. But in this case, the gathered body serves as the group where we welcome new ministries each year, and we also provide accountability to close some ministries that need to be closed each year in this gathering. At the gathering, we will include a what and why time. Each of our ministries, new or previously commissioned, will stand before the group and explain what it is that we want to do, why we want to do it, and why we think God is calling us to do it. Once these ministries are lifted up before the gathered body, individuals have their own time of discernment, determining if they have a passion to fill it. We don't nominate people to serve on these particular ministries. We do it like they did in the beginning of the region, or as we've been seeing lately in the region and in some churches, people find a calling to do something and they are moved to sign up or be part of that new ministry. Now, a little more details about the Operations Council, how we get it, and how they then in turn nominate for the functions. The congregations, as part of the gathered body, will be divided into 12 geographic ministry areas, and they will meet during that gathering in their gathered areas, not just to elect one person to the Operations Council, but also simply to get to know each other, which the hope is that if that relationship develops, new ministries in those areas will also develop. Along with these 12 lay representatives from the geographic ministry areas, 8 clergy will be elected by the clergy either at that particular gathering or at the Ministers' Institute gathering held in January. Again, the Operations Council will serve as the prime administrative committee for the region. The Operations Council will then elect internally its own officers and then will serve as the main nominating committee for the functions, the investment property unit, the personnel unit, and the commission on ministry. It is important to understand that what is being proposed by the Vision Task Group and now through unanimous vote of the Board is nothing short of a complete restart of who we are as church. It is not a fix, it is not a patch, and it is not simply renaming what we already have. It is about becoming something new. But we do believe that this is the best chance we have and the best hope we have for being church as disciples together. Please pause the video to read some of the key features of this new structure. The intent of this video has been to give an overview of the new structure. If you have further questions, please contact the regional office, watch the regional website for more details, and I invite you to come to the called regional assembly so that we can discuss this and discern a decision together on February 12, 2011.